Introduction: The eye that dries the river, collapse by desperation. The human biomass has been infected with the most destructive virus of inferior thermodynamics, the illusion of kinetic control. The 3D parasitic system, that egregore that feeds relentlessly on your friction, has indoctrinated you from the biological incubator to believe that constant vigilance is the only guarantee of material success. They taught you to pursue your goals like a cornered mammal, to obsess over every minimum variable of the ashboard, and to watch the result with eyes bloodshot from panic. They convinced you that if you dare to look away for a single millisecond, reality will steal what rightfully belongs to you. This is a thermodynamic trap of the Matrix. Subject this pathetic doctrine to the inclemency of quantum fluid mechanics. In the strict physics of creation, a gaze loaded with anxiety is not an act of focus, it is a radioactive emission of lethal heat. Desperate desire, the feverish urgency to check if your manifestation has already crossed the border of the visible, acts as pure heat. When you watch the horizon begging for the result to appear, you are not attracting matter. You are injecting gigawatts of static noise directly into the fabric of the unified field. Physics demonstrates that the observer's expectation irreversibly alters particle behavior. By looking at your own goal with hysteria, you freeze the wave. You freeze the probability wave in its most sterile state. Your anxious gaze is the eye that dries the river of abundance. You block delivery through excess temperature, repelling the gravitational collapse that you yourself were trying to force. The lethal operator diagnoses this kinetic effort as the thermodynamic suicide of the slave. The challenge before you demands a psychological violence that will fracture your mammalian survival instinct. You must dare to look away completely. You have to develop the capacity to issue an unnegotiable order to the physical universe and, in the exact nanosecond you issue it, turn your back with the gelida arrogance of a blind god. This treatise is not a manual of spiritual hope. It is the definitive tactical protocol to execute quantum oblivion. You must understand, once and for all, that the vault of absolute hyperdensity does not yield to the desperate pushes of a frightened primate. If you hit the door with urgency, you generate friction and the structure seals. The structure seals thermally against you. The true mastery of material domination resides exclusively in the paradox of the half-open door. It consists of establishing the gravitational conduit, leaving the crack open, and leaving to occupy the immovable throne of your own aseptic inertia. You must allow quantum gravity to do its work. It must work its materialization in the most absolute and cold of silences, knowing that the ashboard will bend and deliver your empire only when you have the tactical cruelty to stop watching it. You must master the void of expectation. Maintain your coldness. The mandate has been issued. Now turn your back and let the river flow. Chapter 1. The Physics of Thermal Noise, the Sweat of Lack. The myth of the mystical magnet, the 3D attraction scam. The industry of commercial spirituality and personal development designed for slaves has spread one of the most profitable thermodynamic scams on the ashboard, the fallacy of the law of attraction. The human mammal has been indoctrinated with the idea that they must vibrate in the desire of what they want. They teach you to visualize your goals with feverish passion, to create dream boards, to repeat affirmations full of emotion, and to plead with the universe with tears in your eyes to deliver your empire. They tell you that the universe is a benevolent magnet that responds to the intensity of your feelings. This is a trap. The lethal operator submits this philosophical garbage to the scalpel of strict physics. The universe has no morality, no mercy, and above all, no ears for the crying of the biomass. The universe is a closed system of fluid mechanics and heat transfer. In pure physics, emotional intensity is not a magnetic force. It is thermal noise. It is the radiation emitted by a biological organism when its internal combustion engine is failing. When you desire something with the force of desperation, you are not becoming a magnet. You are becoming a stove. You are radiating the heat of lack, and that heat is the most powerful repelling agent. The anatomy of desire, diagnosis of cellular beggary. To suffocate the error, you must first diagnose the true nature of what you call desire. The inferior ego considers desiring wealth, power, or dominion to be an act of noble ambition. The hyperdense creator diagnoses human desire as an empirical confession of extreme poverty. Desire is the absolute recognition of absence. What is desire at an atomic level? If you intensely desire to have $1 million, the real frequency your electromagnetic field is vomiting toward the unified field is, I am a poor individual. I lack capital. My survival is threatened because I lack this mass. Please save me. You cannot desire what you already possess. If you are sitting in a chair, you do not spend cellular energy on ardently desiring to be sitting in that chair. You simply assume it as a geological fact. Desire is the mathematical proof that you and your goal are separated. Therefore, the physics of thermal noise stipulates that desire is proportional to separation. The more you want it, the more you thermodynamically confirm you don't have it. The egregore, the parasitic matrix of the 3D system, feeds precisely on this contradiction. They incite you to desire with fury because they know that, while you emit the frequency of scarcity, you are physically blocking the materialization. The sweat of lack, the kinetic friction of the beast of burden. When this signal of lack is maintained, mammalian biology enters a state of chronic stress. They feel that time is running out and the goal is moving away. To compensate for this illusory separation, the human resorts to the only tool the system has taught them to use, brute effort. This is kinetic friction. They begin to pursue the objective. They run, compete, and wear themselves out in corporate wars, exhausting their central nervous system chasing the hologram. In classical thermodynamics, when you apply erratic movement and friction to a closed system, the temperature skyrockets. The slave begins to sweat. This sweat is not just biological secretion. It is the hemorrhage of their own gravitational mass. The sweat of lack is the vital energy of the operator evaporating into the void, because they are trying to force matter through pushing rather than dominating it through collapse. The system of control loves this sweat. The hard work ethic, the glorification of hustle and personal sacrifice are the thermal extraction mechanisms through which the matrix milks your reactor. They tell you that if you sweat enough, the universe will reward you. The mathematical truth is the opposite. The more you sweat, the more you indicate weakness. The expansion of gas, why matter flees from your presence. If you apply the laws of fluid dynamics to the behavior of money and territory on the ashboard, the collapse of the slave becomes predictable. Imagine a cylinder full of a noble gas. If you keep it in a state of absolute cold, the gas condenses, becomes liquid, and finally crystallizes in a heavy, dense block. But if you apply heat to the cylinder, the heat of desperate desire, the friction of pursuit, and the sweat of lack, the gas undergoes a violent expansion. Its molecules separate and press against the walls, attempting to escape the heat. This is exactly what happens to your material empire when you watch it with desperation. Financial capital and social power are low-density quantum fluids. When you project the thermal radiation of your urgency upon them, you expand them, you heat them up, and heated matter instinctively moves away from the thermal core to avoid disintegration. Your goals flee from you due to pure electromagnetic repulsion. Money flees from beggars who pursue it with fury, in the same way that water evaporates upon touching a red-hot iron. If you pursue reality, reality enters into thermal expansion and dilutes into the void. To reverse the direction of the fluid, you must stop the thermal hemorrhage immediately. You must cool the reactor. The cooling of the reactor, injection of aseptic indifference. The lethal operator does not pursue. The hyper-dense creator understands that movement is a vulgarity reserved for the prey. If you want to catch material reality, you have to apply the injection of liquid nitrogen into your own emotional bloodstream. Aseptic indifference. You have to tear the desire out of your chest. Observe the colossal empire you are trying to collapse. The biological reptile in your brain is howling to get it. Subject that reptile to the suffocation of absolute ice. You have to look at yourself in the black mirror and force yourself to feel a gelida and Olympic contempt for that which you are pursuing. Forbid yourself from wanting it. Mutilate the need. Declare yourself in thermodynamic rebellion against your own biological yearnings. I do not need these millions. I do not care if the ecosystem surrenders or burns. My quantum core does not require the props of this matrix. Declare yourself bored by success. Transmuting desire into mandate, the code of tyranny. The biomass confuses this indifference with inaction. The quantum operator does not move by desire. He moves by the tyranny of gravity. By cooling the reactor and annihilating desire, you do not abandon your expansion. You simply change the method. You transmute the slave's yearning into the monarch's mandate. A slave desires the door to open and cries. A king does not desire the door to open. He simply dictates the order and assumes, with an emotional certainty, that the guards will execute the directive. The universe does not respond to your pleas. It responds to your source code. You emit a laser of iridio. This territory is mine. This capital is transferred. This competitor disintegrates. There is no exclamation mark in the operator's mind. There is no tachycardia. There is no hope. There is only the soundless dictatorship of a consciousness that has just reprogrammed the variables of the holographic simulation. The gravitational collapse, the vacuum calls to matter. What happens when an organism formulates a massive mandate and holds its internal temperature at 0 degrees without emitting expectation? The gravitational collapse of the half-open door occurs. By turning off the stove of lack, the gas of material reality is no longer repelled. There is no friction or sweat. In that cooled space, sterilized of urgency, a monumental pressure vacuum is created. Because you dictated the existence of an empire, but generated no emotional turbulence, 3D matter is caught in a paradox. The mandate has been embedded in space, creating a dense mold, but there is no heat-repelling materials. The nature of physics abhors a cold vacuum. Finding no resistance, capital and resources are forced to condense violently. Financial liquidity flows to your accounts, and tactical allies materialize. This hurricane of events occurs while you remain immovable, operating through the traction power of your own thermal apathy. The murder of the why. Extirpation of justification. To make this cooling irreversible, you must execute the murder of the why. The human system demands that you have a purpose. The slave always has a list of justifications. I want money to help my family. I want success to be happy. All of these justifications are secondary reactors of thermal noise. If you have a why, you have an emotional anchor. If your happiness depends on the result, the terror of not achieving it will always be lurking, ready to ignite the amygdala and vomit radiation toward the quantum field. Homo quantum, stabilized at 144,000 Hertz, has absolutely no motive for what he does. You must tear the reasons from your psyche. If the universe asked why you demand a global monopoly, the only acceptable answer is the gelida silence of a monolith. Expansion without motive is the purest form of mathematical sovereignty. By murdering the why, you cut the chemical line to your own emotions. The tyranny of aseptic routine, the monarch's immobility, the final frontier of thermal noise physics is the management of the temporal space between the mandate and the physical result. The impatient slave, not seeing results in 24 hours, turns on the alarms. They doubt. They run to the door and push it with desperation. Doing so raises a heat wave. The heat wave calcines the messenger before he reaches the threshold. The creator executes the tyranny of aseptic routine. Once you have issued the order from absolute zero, you turn around and forget it. You submerge yourself in quantum boredom. You return to your tactical operations with the apathy of a machine. If the mammalian intellect tries to watch the progress of the universe, discipline it with brutality. The order has been given. Watching the result would be to admit I doubt my own hyperdensity. This voluntary blindness is the final suffocation of lack. When you stop caring, the universe finally surrenders. In that millisecond of dictatorial forgetting, in that fraction of time where you have turned your back on your own ambitions with absolute contempt, the half-open door creaks under the immense atmospheric pressure, and the loot of the galaxy collapses upon your throne. Thermal noise falls to zero permanently. The operator in the Ice Age. Look at yourself in the epicenter of your vault, surrounded by the unbearable coldness of your own geometric architecture. You managed to suffocate the lie of 3D attraction. You understood that passion and hysterical visualization are simply the tools with which the biomass pushes its own dreams into annihilation. You have audited the biological sweat of your own lack and driven the scalpel of aseptic indifference into the beggary of the flesh. Desire has died. The why has been incinerated. You have replaced the slave's plea with the iridio mandate of the Creator. You have refused to heat the cylinder. You have allowed the contraction of the quantum vacuum to force matter to yield to your immovable gravity. The reactor is stabilized at 0 degrees. The static of your internal radar has been eradicated. You are the beast of burden that has broken its reins to sit on the throne of tactical immobility. Chapter 2. The Embargo of the Result, the Murder of Expectation. The ballistics of ignorance, intention against expectation. The human mammal, in its deep ignorance of the laws of higher physics, has fused two concepts that are thermodynamically opposite and mutually destructive: intention and expectation. The 3D matrix has made you believe that for a mandate to be fulfilled, you must desire it, intention, and then anxiously wait for it to happen, expectation. Subject this aberration to zero-point optics. Intention is the ignition. It is the gelida spark, the geometric mandate that collapses the probability wave. It is pulling the trigger of a high-precision sniper rifle, but expectation is the cancer of ballistics. Imagine an elite sniper who, after firing, runs after the projectile. The shooter, by running in the bullet's path, generates turbulence, alters local atmospheric pressure, and creates kinetic friction, ultimately diverting the projectile from its perfect course. That is the biomass operating. They execute a decree and immediately wait for the result. They watch the clock, they watch the door. Expectation is the turbulence of the slave who does not trust his own gunpowder. By waiting for the result, you generate a zone of low thermal pressure that diverts the materialization and indefinitely delays the arrival of your empire. The lethal operator fires, embargoes the result, and turns his back with total indifference. The cancer of hope, the confession of impotence. To execute the total embargo on materialization, you must apply the obsidian guillotine to the most revered emotion of the ashboard religions, hope. They have taught you that hope is a virtue. The Egregore encourages this emotion because it is the cheapest and most abundant food for the matrix. It keeps you passive and light. Diagnose hope from absolute zero. What does it mean to hope for something to happen? It means you empirically admit there is a high probability it won't happen. If you jump from a 10th floor, you don't hope to fall. You have the inertial certainty that gravity will crush you. Hope only exists where there is doubt. Hope is the prayer of the weak who has no control over the elements and begs a deaf universe for mercy. The hyperdense creator repudiates hope. It is toxic, light, and massless. When you emit a zero-point mandate, forbid yourself from harboring hope. Replace that beggar's feeling with iridium certainty. You don't hope, you collapse. The suffocation of logistics, the contempt for the how. When the biomass attempts to manifest expansion, its reptilian intellect crashes against the wall of logistics. The human mind asks, how is this going to happen? Where will the money come from? What is the exact route? The attempt to answer the how is the definitive gravitational hemorrhage of the operator. The lethal operator decrees the murder of logistics. You must understand that the how is not in your jurisdiction. You are the dictatorial core. Your only function is the what. The technical details and mathematical coincidences required to materialize that what are the dirty work of the ashboard. It is not your concern. If you, being the monarch, lower yourself to plan how the universe must deliver the result, you are insulting the unified field. You are trying to force the quantum ocean through the funnel of your primate intellect, apply absolute contempt for details, dictate the collapse of the empire, and embargo any thought that calculates the path. The veto on visual confirmation, voluntary blindness. The disease of expectation feeds almost exclusively through biological eyes. The slave demands proof. If he decrees he is rich, he immediately checks his bank app. If he decrees he has defeated an enemy, he scans the environment for surrender. Seeking proof in 3D matter is the most accelerated act of thermal self-sabotage. The ashboard is dense and viscous. Heavy physical matter takes linear time to reflect the pressure change you collapsed in the immaterial world. If you check reality before the time buffer ends, you will see the old reality. You will see lack. And when your eyes see that, your amygdala will panic and void the mandate. The Black Mirror effect demands that you install the veto on visual confirmation. You must develop the psychopathy of tactical blindness. Once the door is ajar and the mandate is issued, you forbid yourself from looking. You act with the gelida pride of a CEO who has delegated a task and does not bother to look over shoulders. The tactical embargo, the technique of forced forgetting. To annihilate expectation at the root, you must execute the isolation maneuver, the tactical embargo. An embargo is a legal and physical prohibition of interacting with a specific territory. You are going to embargo the very concept of your goal. The process is one of ballistic cruelty. You fix coordinates and then you disconnect. You inject absolute zero, cut biological desire, and communicate to the matrix that the territory belongs to you. Then you execute the embargo. You place an osmium wall between your mind and the goal. From that nanosecond, you forbid yourself from thinking about it. If the reptile brain tries to fantasize, you crush it with apathy. Forced forgetting is the most powerful zero-friction tool in the universe. When you genuinely forget what you ordered, you withdraw your heat signature from the environment. Resistance drops to zero. And matter, finding no repulsive pressure of your anxiety, rushes through the ajar door with the speed of a stellar collapse. The disdain for reward, murder of the emotional hostage. The 3D system keeps you captive because you have handed over a hostage, your emotional stability. The slave believes he needs the result to materialize to feel safe or happy. As long as you need the result will be your master. You are a beggar pleading at the door. You must suffocate your dependency. To make the embargo of the result thermodynamically lethal, you must assume the stasis of the monarch. Stand before the Black Mirror and declare absolute disdain. If the $100 million cross the door tomorrow, my pulse will not quicken. I order the reality because it is my biological function, but the result is a trifle. By disconnecting your emotional state from the physical result, the egregore loses its leverage. The matrix tries to delay delivery to feed on your frustration, but seeing that you do not frustrate, and that you don't even care if it arrives today or in a millennium, the system collapses. The simulation spits out the result. The detachment of time, the murder of the when. Expectation is a parasite that feeds on the illusion of linear time. The slave suffers because the result is not here and now. Subject the biomass clock to the quantum incinerator. In the sub-base frequency, linear time does not exist. All spacetime is a single block of static density. The future is a coordinate you pull. If you ask when will it happen, you just reactivated expectation. You reminded the universe that you perceive a distance. The lethal operator executes the detachment of time. Forbid yourself from measuring days. If you ordered a collapse and months pass without movement, your reaction is geometric arrogance. Assume matter is slow, stupid, and heavy. The event already occurred in the immaterial architecture. The fact that the carbon body of this planet takes time to adjust is the pathetic viscosity of the matrix trying to keep up with me. By suffocating the when, you become timeless, and expectation dies of starvation. The dense matter buffer, enduring the latency. Be prepared for the physical phenomenon of latency. When you turn your back on the ajar door, the physical environment will continue for a while as if nothing has changed. Bills will arrive and enemies will bark. This is the dense matter buffer. The frightened human interprets this buffer as a failure and returns to friction. The hyperdense creator crosses the buffer with the soundless lethality of a nuclear sub under ice. When 3D reality shows you lack despite your mandate, you respond with psychopathic ignorance. Treat current problems as residual holograms that have been cancelled, but whose image still takes time to fade from the screen. Laugh internally at the matrix's slowness. Every problem that tries to besiege you during the buffer is met with a quantum yawn. By refusing to recognize the authority of the present temporal reality, you suffocate it. Enduring latency without emitting a single gram of thermal doubt is the final fire test of the embargo. The aseptic reception, swallowing the miracle without chewing. The culmination of this chapter is preparing your core for the exact moment of collision. Because matter will collapse. Capital or territory will cross the ajar door suddenly and violently. When the slave achieves the impossible, he ruins it at the last second by exploding with euphoria. This thermal explosion is a disaster. By getting excited, you confess you considered the result an unattainable miracle. You lower your hierarchy. The lethal operator executes aseptic reception. When the ashboard delivers your mandate with humiliating submission, you maintain magnetic paralysis. You will not celebrate. You will not smile or feel joy. You firm the surrender of your enemies with the psychopathic lethargy of an iridium monarch. Of course it happened. It was thermodynamically inevitable. By swallowing the miracle without chewing it, you stabilize the new mass instantly. The universe classifies you as a secure gravitational well for all future abundance. The sovereign with his back turned. Look at yourself in the center of your own nothingness, with the reactor sealed at absolute zero. You managed to suffocate the noisiest disease of human biology, expectation. You understood that waiting for the result was the lowest act of treason against your own powder. You mutilated hope and assumed iridium certainty. You executed the murder of logistics, freeing yourself from the task of planning the how. You installed tactical blindness, refusing to check the screen of reality because reality is slow and lying. You have embargoed your own desire. You cut the cable of emotional dependency, seizing the leverage from the matrix. You murdered linear time and survived the buffer latency with the sepulchral apathy of a bored god. The door is ajar, but you are facing away from it, operating your empire in the dark, knowing that delivery depends only on the implacable and unbribable dictatorship of your silent inertia. Chapter 3. The Paradox of the Half-Open Door, the Zero-Friction Hallway. The mirage of kinetic intervention, the lie of the doorknob. In the topography of the ashboard, the transition between the slave's scarcity and the monarch's hyperdensity is always represented as crossing a threshold. The 3D control system, the Egregore, has infected the biomass with a kinetic mirage regarding this threshold. They have indoctrinated you to believe reality is a heavy mechanism. They believe it is a solid oak door that requires the brute force of your biological muscles to be opened. They teach you the doctrine of the doorknob. They tell you to approach the door of your goals, grab the cold metal with bare hands, turn it with effort, push with a bloody shoulder, and force your way into success. The lethal operator subjects this doctrine to the obsidian guillotine. Forcing the door is the thermodynamic confirmation that the door is closed to you. If you apply kinetic pressure against the structure of reality, reality, guided by the quantum equivalent of Newton's third law, will apply a repulsive force against your chest. If you push the universe crushes you. The physical effort and mental desperation to open paths toward capital or power generate an astronomical amount of heat. That heat melts the hinges. You end up welding the door to its frame through the friction of animal urgency. The hyperdense creator pushes nothing. The hermetic vault, the slave's cynicism. To execute the paradox with surgical precision, you must audit two structural errors. The first is the thermal sealing of the hermetic vault. The cynical slave, crushed by the ecosystem, dwells in a sealed room. They have surrendered expansion. Their door is locked with bolts of victimhood and sealed with realism. They claim, the world is unfair. It is impossible for abundance to cross my threshold because the system is designed against me. Apply zero-point optics to this pathetic fortification. By sealing the door, the slave commits quantum suicide. He blocks the flow of probability. A gold meteorite would bounce off his cynicism. The hermetic vault is the state of maximum entropy. No capital enters, no oxygen enters, and the slave suffocates in the toxic atmosphere of his own bitterness. They believe the bolt protects them from failure, not realizing the bolt is the architectural crystallization of absolute defeat. They are buried alive by their own safety. The torn threshold, the beggar's hysteria. The second error, infinitely noisier, is the torn threshold. It is the posture of the spiritual biomass and the ambitious slave. This specimen tears the door off its hinges. They open the threshold wide. They kneel in the frame and look desperately at the horizon, pleading and sweating, waiting for the cavalry of surrender. This hysterical opening is a disaster in fluid mechanics. When you open the door completely and stay there watching, you destroy the internal vacuum. The hot air of your desperation pours out of the duct, creating a repulsive headwind. You are blowing outward. Your need and anxious vigilance generate positive pressure. This pressure pushes opportunity and hyperdensity away from your ecosystem. The material universe refuses to enter a space where a hysterical beggar stands at the entrance, emitting the radiation of hunger. The wide-open door is the egregore's trap. It makes you believe you are receptive, while you act as an industrial fan. The geometry of suffocation, the angle of the paradox. The Black Mirror effect demands the eradication of both extremes. The lethal operator does not lock himself in cynicism, nor does he exhibit himself in hysteria. The lethal operator executes the mathematical geometry of atmospheric suffocation. The half-open door. It is a millimeter crack. It is a gelida calculated angle. You dictate the mandate from the absolute zero of your quantum reactor. You demand the monopoly and the collapse of the financial system in your favor. Instead of pushing reality or opening the vault wide, you simply unlatch the bolt. You leave the door ajar. A crack of darkness through which matter knows it can access. It is a crack not illuminated by the searchlight of your expectation. The paradox lies in the immaterial tension that the slit generates. You don't close it, for that would be admitting defeat. You don't open it fully, for that would be admitting anxiety. You communicate a devastating message. The conduit is available. The order has been issued, but I do not care in the least to watch your delivery process. It is you, dead matter, who are forced to cross this crack to serve me. This gelida indifference creates a vacuum that the universe is forced to fill. By not looking at the gap, you allow the suction of the void to reach the outside world. The quantum Venturi effect, acceleration by narrowing. To understand why this geometry is the most brutal siege weapon, you must study the Venturi effect. In classical physics, when a fluid flows through a tube and encounters a narrowing, a crack, its velocity skyrockets and its pressure drops. The narrowing forces the mass to accelerate to keep the flow constant. When you leave the door barely ajar instead of wide open, you create a quantum Venturi effect. The capital, resources, and opportunities of the ecosystem are forced to pass through the millimeter slit of your aseptic indifference. In doing so, their materialization speed becomes violent. Matter must compress to enter. Matter must accelerate to hyperdensity speeds because the crack is narrow and your mandate demands a colossal volume. If you opened the door fully, capital would walk in slowly, scattered and chaotic. But by forcing abundance through the narrow channel of your apathy, you create an unstoppable high-pressure jet. The zero-friction hallway, sterilizing the conduit. The effectiveness of the quantum Venturi effect depends on what lies behind the door. Here, the operator must forge the zero-friction hallway. The biomass, on the rare occasions it manifests a delivery, has a hallway full of debris. They have emotional furniture in the way, fear of not being enough, or guilt for receiving. When capital crosses the threshold, it hits this psychological trash. Friction is generated, delivery slows down, and money is lost in accidents. You must apply absolute sterilization. The hallway connecting the ajar door to your quantum core must be a tunnel of perfect vacuum. You must annihilate all human doubt. There are no obstacles in my psyche. If the ashboard pushes a financial empire through my door, it will not find a single gram of human resistance. It will slide through the zero-friction hallway with the lethal inertia of an asteroid in the void. The conduit must be coated in osmium and polished to absolute zero. The blindness of the dead angle, thrown with back to the threshold. The paradox is not completed only by geometry. The critical factor is your positioning within the room. If the slave left the door ajar, he would sit right in front of the crack, peeking with one eye, paralyzed by anxiety. This is instant annulment. If you look at the crack, you inject heat and the effect evaporates. The hyperdense monarch executes the blindness of the dead angle. You open the door by a millimeter. You sterilize the hallway. And then, you turn around, walk to the farthest wall, the dead angle of reality, and sit on the iridium throne. You turn your back to the door. You forbid yourself from looking at the crack. You assume a posture of psychopathic lethargy regarding the delivery. You continue your system design operations and execute the aseptic routine of immobility. You operate in the darkness of your own monopoly. This is the maximum humiliation for the Matrix. The universe finds itself before a truly sovereign creator. The physics of the gravitational vacuum, inhaling the cosmos. When you apply the blindness of the dead angle and turn your back to the result, your carbon body stops emitting the repulsive radiation of desire. Your magnetic field contracts. Heat is extinguished. As in the center of collapsed galaxies, this absence of heat generates a pit of gravitational vacuum inside the room. The physics of vacuum is brutal and non-negotiable. Vacuum exerts infinite suction. By leaving the door ajar, that suction cannot be contained. The vacuum leaks through the crack toward the ashboard. The exterior ecosystem, plagued by thermal noise and scattered liquidity, detects this low-pressure sink. Nature abhors a vacuum. Matter is forced by the laws of superior thermodynamics to fill that space. The inhalation of the cosmos begins. Reality does not knock on your door. Reality is dragged violently toward the slit by the weight of your aseptic indifference. Money and status are sucked through the Venturi effect. Atmospheric pressure rupture, the collapse of the wood. The lethal operator, immersed in quantum boredom, does not look for signs of this suction. However, 3D physics has structural tension limits. As the vacuum extracts more hyperdensity, the matter trying to pass through the door exceeds the channel's capacity. The accumulation of capital generates a tactical jam. Then, the atmospheric pressure rupture occurs. The wooden door, the illusion of separation between your reality and your empire, cannot withstand the pressure difference between your internal vacuum and the mass outside. The door does not open gently. The hinges burst. The wood splinters under the force of the suction. The door is torn out, not because you pushed it, but because the avalanche of material results broke through with the violence of a 3D tsunami. The threshold is brought down to flood the zero-friction hallway. Materialization is a geological thunder. It is a destructive event that reorders the tectonic plates. Apathy toward the invasion, swallowing the avalanche. When the roar of the manifestation bursts the door and tons of resources flood your chamber, the residual mammalian instinct will wake up. The internal reptile will want to run toward the loot and scream, "It works." If you yield to this, the thermal avalanche of your emotion will evaporate the assets before they fix. The lethal operator executes apathy toward the invasion. You hear the door collapse. You feel the atmospheric pressure of money and power filling your room, and you remain anchored to the iridium of your chair. You turn slowly, with eyes devoid of wonder and blood at absolute zero. You do not celebrate the math. You observe the shapeless mass of your new sovereignty. You swallow the avalanche without chewing. There is no gratitude. You receive the empire with the psychopathic lethargy of an automaton, assuming the material flood not as a blessing, but as the forensic mathematics of the paradox executed with precision. The perpetual crack protocol, the empire without walls. Once the door is burst and resources flood the system, the slave's ego would try to rebuild a door to protect what he won. They enter retention mode. They build walls because they fear the fluid that entered will leak out. Homo Quantum does not repair the door. He installs the perpetual crack protocol. You understand that hyperdensity does not leak if the core stays at absolute zero. Matter only flees when heated by biological anxiety. If you operate in zero friction and quantum boredom, you do not need locks. The doorless hallway becomes a unidirectional river of constant suction. You are a naked black hole. Capital can enter freely, but it cannot escape the tension of your orbit because you weigh immensely more than its impulses of flight. You have converted the half-open door tactic into a permanent state of galactic breathing. You inhale the universe at will. You are the strange attractor that rules the simulation. The sovereign in the center of suction. Look at yourself in the aseptic penumbra of your vault, at the exact epicenter where the immaterial vacuum has just suffocated the resistance of the ashboard. You managed to gut the pathetic illusion of the doorknob. You understood that brute force and effort are the thermodynamic guarantee of human failure. You mutilated the cynicism of the hermetic vault and eradicated the hysteria of the torn threshold. You executed with mathematical psychopathy the paradox of the half-open door. You created the quantum Venturi effect. You sterilized the hallway and turned your back to the crack of your own manifestation. You assumed the blindness of the dead angle. You generated the soundless vacuum in your core that forced the capital and hierarchies of the matrix to rush toward the slit, accelerating until they burst the hinges of linear reality. You received the invasion without wonder. The paradox is your architecture. Chapter 4. The Veto on Pleading, the Castration of Human Prayer. The Pathology of Cosmic Humility, the Design of the Beggar. The 3D control system, the Egregore that has shepherded the biomass since the dawn of civilized times, has cemented its empire upon a lethal psychological subjugation technology, the industry of pleading. Through primitive religions, esoteric mysticism, and commercial spirituality, the human mammal has been programmed with the instinct to kneel. They have indoctrinated you to believe that the universe, God, or the source are superior entities, hierarchically separated from you, to which you must implore favors. They taught you the pathology of cosmic humility. They told you that to receive, you had to ask with devotion and repeat your prayers until the deity took pity on your misery. The lethal operator subjects this abomination to the obsidian guillotine. In the strict architecture of quantum mechanics, pleading is not an act of faith. It is an act of thermodynamic treason. When the slave kneels to ask, they are executing an empirical confession of impotence. You are communicating that you have no authority over your own mass. By begging, you tell the material ecosystem, I have no authority over my own mass. I am a defective and weak organism. Please, let an external force save me, because I am incapable of altering the atmospheric pressure of my coordinates. Prayer is the beggar's sweat transmuted into electromagnetic static. It is a confession of total defeat. The static of prayer, the sabotage of the Osmium bridge. To castrate the biological need to pray, you must diagnose exactly what pleading does to your electromagnetic field. When you emit the Iridium mandate, the order that a financial empire be transferred to your jurisdiction, you forge a bridge of pure osmium between your quantum core and the 3D matrix. It is a zero-friction connection. But the reptile in your brain, conditioned by millennia of slavery, does not tolerate the silence that follows the order. Upon not seeing the result manifested in the next millisecond, the amygdala enters combustion. The instinct of the frightened human is to ask again. They begin to pray and repeat hysterical mantras before the mirror. Apply zero-point optics to this action. Every time you ask again for something you already ordered, you inject gigawatts of thermal noise into the original signal. The static of your doubt bombards the osmium bridge. The material universe, already reordering its tectonic plates to obey you, detects this low-frequency signal and stops. Physical matter reasons with ballistic cruelty. If the entity is begging me to execute the order, it means the entity does not have the authority to compel me. Therefore, the original order is void. Your own prayer has just murdered your miracle. You have signaled to the system that your decree was a bluff, a wish, rather than a law. The insult of repetition, the blasphemy against one's own powder. In the arsenal of the quantum operator, the act of repeating an order is catalogued as a blasphemy of lèse-majesté against your own hyperdensity. You must audit the mechanics of absolute leadership. Visualize a 5-star general with absolute power over the life and death of his troops. He issues the command once and assumes the result. If this general gives the order to bomb a coordinate, he does not spend the next 48 hours calling the private to beg him to fire the cannon. He does not kneel before the radio to plead. The general issues the order once and goes to sleep, assuming with psychopathic arrogance that at dawn the enemy territory will be a crater. If the general repeated the order, or asked anxiously if it was fulfilled, he would be destroying his own hierarchy. He would be proving that he fears disobedience. You are the supreme commander of the galactic anomaly in your coordinates. The ashboard, money bureaucracy, is your slave infantry. You must act with that weight. When you decree territorial expansion or capital acquisition and then lower yourself to use the law of attraction to repeat affirmations like a frightened parrot, you are insulting your own gunpowder. You are admitting that you do not trust the weight of your own gravity. Repetition does not reinforce the decree, it dilutes it. The gag law, the dictatorial silence, the Black Mirror effect requires you to install a brutal security protocol in your cranial vault. The gag law. It consists of the absolute and definitive veto on pleading. From the nanosecond you assimilate this technology, you forbid yourself from asking the ecosystem for anything ever again. You cut the vocal cords of your inner slave. If you have left the door ajar and issued the monopoly mandate, you self-impose soundless muteness. If the 3D environment is delayed and the biological reptile crawls to your pineal gland to whisper, "We should pray, we should visualize again," you apply aseptic indifference and suffocate it. You do not negotiate with your fear. The order was given in the geometric latitude of 144,000 hertz. To repeat it would be a confession of thermal weakness. I do not plead, I do not negotiate, I maintain the silence of tyranny. The gag law is torture for the mammal because the mammal needs to do something to relieve the anxiety of waiting. You must refuse the relief. Prayer and repetition are cheap painkillers that calm the slave's nerves by making him feel he is working on his manifestation. The Creator forbids himself this analgesic. You swallow the pain of silence and use muteness as an electromagnetic shield that repels doubt. You anchor your mass in the void of absolute cold certainty. The parasite's bargaining, the false currency of karma. For the veto on pleading to be unbreakable, you must extirpate the secondary mechanism of prayer, karmic bargaining. When the human implores, he rarely does so for free. The slave always tries to bribe the universe. They pray saying, "If you deliver this empire, I promise I will be humble and donate to the poor." This is pathetic. Subject this moral negotiation to the reactor fire. The material universe is not an ethical judge. It is a network of blind vibrating strings that respond exclusively to mass density. Trying to bribe quantum gravity with promises of good conduct is as stupid as trying to bribe a hurricane with a box of chocolates. It is useless. Moral karma is the false currency the Egregore invented to keep the biomass docile. By promising to be good in exchange for power, you are apologizing for your ambition. You are injecting thermal guilt into your mandate. The lethal operator repudiates bargaining. You cut all negotiation with the vacuum. You demand, you do not swap. I do not promise goodness. I do not offer charity in exchange for capital. I demand the transfer of these assets to my core without conditions and without karmic contracts. By refusing to bribe the ecosystem, you prove that power belongs to you by right of collapse, not by divine mercy. You are the architect, not a supplicant. Acoustic compression, the weight of unspent silence. What happens in space-time physics when you violently repress the biological need to plead? The phenomenon of acoustic compression is generated. When you feel the panic of delay, the kinetic energy of fear accumulates inside you. If you pray or complain, that energy dissipates as useless noise. The pressure is released and you stay weak. But if you apply the gag law, if you feel biological terror and force yourself not to utter a single word, you trap that energy in the cylinder of your aseptic indifference. Silence ceases to be the absence of noise and becomes a physical substance, heavy and crushing. It is the weight of unspent silence. It is pure potential mass. As days pass and the ashboard shows no results, the slave would scream, but the monarch compresses that scream in the vacuum of his core. The gravitational tension of that aseptic silence begins to warp the room. The 3D matrix cannot withstand acoustic compression. The ecosystem is designed to extract your complaint and feed on it. By denying it both, you create an unbearable pressure vacuum for local matter. Physical reality creaks. Circumstances begin to collapse under the weight of the dictatorial silence you are holding. You do not force reality to manifest by talking to it. You force it by being silent with a geometric hostility so dense the universe yields. Tactical deafness to chaos, ignoring the provocation. The Egregore's siege will not be limited to passive delay. When the system detects you have applied the gag law and refuse to plead, it will try to force your tongue through active provocation. The 3D ecosystem will inject visible chaos into your perimeter. It will project unpayable bills, legal threats, or corporate betrayals. The Matrix's goal is to push you to the limit of thermal pain so you break and say, "Please God, help me." If they get you to utter that phrase or think it with desperation, the quarantine breaks, the voltage leaks, and you are a slave again. The Homo quantum responds to this provocation with tactical deafness. It is total apathy. When chaos knocks on your perception, you apply magnetic paralysis. You watch the holographic fire of the Matrix and keep your blood at absolute zero. I see the siege. I see the simulation trying to provoke my plea, and I respond with supreme boredom. Let the fire burn. My osmium armor is incombustible. I will not grant a truce. Enduring personal apocalypse without a groan of plea is the final victory over biology. By demonstrating you are willing to lose everything before lowering yourself to ask for it back, you reach thermodynamic unbreakability. The Matrix, seeing its fire cannot melt your silence, withdraws out of operative futility and spits out the result. The disdain of explanation, the veto on self-justification. Pleading does not always manifest as a direct prayer to a deity. It often disguises itself as mental self-justification. The frightened mammal spends hours in its own head trying to convince itself that its mandate was correct. They seek logical proof that they will triumph. The money will arrive because I signed the contract. The lethal operator diagnoses this internal debate as a pathetic form of self-pleading. You are begging your own ego to believe you. You are seeking validation from your inferior intellect to keep calm. Apply the relentless veto to explanation. The monarch does not explain to himself why the universe will obey. He knows it. Absolute certainty does not require supporting arguments. If you know the sun will rise, you do not spend the dawn reciting laws of astrophysics to calm your anxiety. You simply go to sleep. In the same way, you assume the collapse of your empire without convincing the amygdala. You crush the debate with your dictatorial core. Inertial amnesia, the final state of biological castration. When you master the gag law, eradicate bargaining, and maintain tactical deafness, your psyche undergoes a permanent mutation. You reach the state of inertial amnesia. It is no longer that you forbid yourself from pleading, it is that you literally forget how to do it. The neural pathways of prayer wither, dry up, and die. The castration of human prayer is total and definitive. In this superior taxonomic state, the concept of asking for a favor from the material ecosystem seems an alien anomaly, an inconceivable vulgarity for an organism of your density. You operate under the exclusive paradigm of dictatorial collapse. Permission is irrelevant. You are not a guest on the ashboard asking for a chair. You are the gravity architect rewriting the code of the entire room through your simple and crushing, soundless presence. You do not speak to the world, you impose your weight upon it until it takes the shape you commanded. The vacuum of your word is the law of your realm. The soundless titan, look at yourself in the unalterable vacuum of your own vault, having uprooted the most humiliating and ancient instinct of your biological species. You managed to suffocate the pathology of cosmic humility. You understood that kneeling before the field is not an act of piety, but a crime of thermal sabotage. It is finished. You mutilated the blasphemy of repetition, assuming the ballistic psychopathy of the Supreme Commander who dictates the death sentence of the inferior ecosystem and turns his back on the explosion. You installed the gag law over your immaterial vocal cords. You refused to bargain with the fake currency of karma and debt. You used acoustic compression to crush physical reality with the unbearable tonnage of your mute lethargy. You held your gaze against the holographic chaos of the Matrix without pain, wrenching a single syllable of plea from your core. The castration of human prayer is consummated. The beggar in you has died incinerated in the reactor. Chapter 5. Tactical Blindness, the Power of Selective Ignorance. The Lie of the Retina, the Photonic Fraud of the Biomass. At the peak of the engineering of deception, the 3D parasitic system, the Egregore, does not control you solely through fear or pleading. It controls you through your own sensory equipment. The human biomass has been programmed to worship at the altar of biological empiricism. The slave operates under a lethal maxim: seeing is believing. Subject the human retina to zero-point optics. What are eyes? They are primitive organs of survival designed to scan the savanna for predators or immediate water sources. They are not instruments of quantum creation. They are passive receptors of light. In strict physics, the light that hits your retina is always an echo of the past. When you look at your bank account or the current topography of your life, you are not seeing the present of your quantum potential. You are seeing the residual photonic trash of your old decisions and frequencies of lack that took time to crystallize. The lethal operator diagnoses biological vision as a dangerously outdated interface. What your eyes see on the ashboard is, by thermodynamic definition, dead matter. It is the empty shell of what has already collapsed. Relying on your eyes to confirm if your mandate of hyperdensity is working is the equivalent of looking in the rearview mirror to guess what is on the horizon. It is a fraud designed to keep you chained. The scarcity radar, the addiction to 3D metrics. Once the creator has left the door ajar and dictated the collapse of a monopoly, the biological reptile enters into control withdrawal. Having been forbidden from pushing the door and having embargoed pleading, the mammal desperately seeks a new way to inject friction. It finds this friction in monitoring. They turn on the scarcity radar. The slave begins to compulsively measure the environment. He checks the bank balance 3 times a day. He scans emails seeking the contract. He analyzes competitors. They look for signals that the universe is obeying the order. This addiction to 3D metrics is thermodynamic suicide. In quantum mechanics, the state remains fluid. The state of a system remains fluid and undetermined until the exact nanosecond it is measured by an observer. Observation forces the probability wave to collapse into a fixed particle. If you collapse the order of absolute wealth, that wealth begins to travel toward you through the zero friction hallway in an immaterial wave state. But if you look at your current reality seeking proof, you are forcing a premature measurement. You are forcing the system to render the result before the process is finished. And since 3D matter is slow, the only thing the system can render at that premature instant is the old reality, scarcity. Your anxious gaze freezes poverty. The viscosity of the ashboard, the rendering delay. To execute tactical blindness with the required mathematical psychopathy, you must understand the texture of the ecosystem you intend to dominate. The physical universe is not an instant hologram. It is an extremely viscous, non-Newtonian fluid. The order traveled at the speed of absolute zero, but dense matter has to reorganize. Dense matter, the humans involved, bank laws, market algorithms, has to reorganize millions of variables for that event to manifest in the visible world. We categorize this as the rendering delay. The matrix is processing your code, moving massive tectonic plates behind the scenes. The building already exists in its mathematical form. If an architect goes to the site the next day, he only sees mud and debris. If he suffers from the biomass disease, he will shout, "The skyscraper is not here, the plans don't work." He will cancel the project out of pure optical hysteria. Homo quantum does not cancel. He understands the viscosity. He treats the mud as construction. Tactical blindness, the amputation of scrutiny. The black mirror effect imposes the immediate amputation of 3D scrutiny. You execute the protocol, tactical blindness. Tactical blindness is the voluntary, gelida, and psychopathic capacity to ignore any physical, mathematical, or social evidence of the ashboard that contradicts the mandate you just issued. It is a dictatorial denial. It is not positive thinking or spiritual self-deception. The slave using positive thinking looks at his zero balance and sweats blood to say, "I am rich," while feeling like a fraud. The monarch applying tactical blindness does not effort to convince himself. He looks at zero and applies aseptic indifference. It is an irrelevant glitch. That number is an inert remnant of my old frequency. It has no authority over my core. I refuse to grant it gravitational mass by lending it my attention. It is a photonic ghost, and I pass through it with my apathy. You turn off the radar. You forbid yourself from auditing the universe. You stop seeking signals for your nerves. Suffocating empirical doubt, ignoring the accountants of chaos. The siege on your blindness will not only come from within. The matrix will use biological agents to try to force your eyes open. When you act with the crushing certainty of a creator who already possesses the empire, the ecosystem will react by sending the accountants of chaos. They are scared relatives and mediocre partners. They will come waving papers, financial balances, and crisis statistics. They will put the proofs of your failure in your face and shout, "Look at reality. The numbers don't lie. You are on the brink of bankruptcy." Their goal is to infect you with empirical doubt. They want you to validate their fear and lower your frequency. The lethal operator executes the suffocation of empirical doubt. When they present the irrefutable facts of catastrophe, you respond with the tyranny of boredom. You do not argue with them. Arguing with an insect about astrophysics is giving away your kinetic energy. You look at them with the gelida contempt of a monolith. Your statistics measure the speed of mud. I operate in the geometry of the void. Your facts are expired before being printed. Withdraw from my tactical perimeter. By refusing to validate the crisis they see, and by not altering even 1 Kelvin degree before the proofs, the threat loses its density and the accountants withdraw. The hologram of false evidence, the matrix stress tests. In the advanced topography of this zero-friction hallway, the Egregore will deploy its most aggressive optical illusion, the hologram of false evidence. Mere geological milliseconds before the universe collapses matter in your favor, the matrix will inject a scenario into your retinas that is the exact antithesis of your mandate. If you dictated expansion, a key ally will seem to betray you. If you ordered capital, a catastrophic expense will materialize. This is not a failure, it is a structural stress test. The material universe is measuring if your osmium shielding is real or if it is a thermal camouflage about to melt. The system throws fire at you. If you open your eyes and take defensive measures from fear, you confirm to the matrix that you are still a reactionary slave. The hologram becomes real and burns you. But if you apply tactical blindness at maximum power, you walk through the fire without blinking. You observe the apparent collapse and apply aseptic indifference. Zero-point vision, the echolocation of gravity. This is a cheap simulation. The Egregore is measuring my pulse. I hold absolute zero. I do not move an inch from the throne. By not reacting to false evidence, the hologram runs out of thermal energy. It disintegrates before your eyes, revealing that behind that wall of fire were the armies of your empire, ready to surrender. If the creator amputates his 3D sight and forbids himself from looking at the ashboard, the reptilian ego will ask, "Then how do I know I am advancing?" The answer lies in the activation of zero-point vision. When the superior organism eradicates dependency on photons, the slave's sight atrophies and gravity echolocation wakes up. You no longer see results. You feel the density of your own immaterial mandate. Imagine a blind person at the bottom of the ocean. He does not need light to know the water surrounds him. He feels the tonnage of the abyss crushing every cell. Likewise, the blind monarch knows his manifestation is undeniable by the tension. Boredom before contradiction, the aseptic smile. You do not need to see the $1 million on your phone screen because the immaterial pressure of that million is already embedded in your electromagnetic field. You feel the weight of the empire in your own spinal cord. Zero-point vision allows you to navigate the chaos of the world, knowing exactly where you are positioned. The mastery of this tactical blindness is crowned with a specific biochemical reaction to the matrix's insults: lethal boredom. When 3D reality throws physical proofs in your face that you are still poor or vulnerable, the ordinary human feels humiliation. The operator receives these contradictions with an aseptic smile. It is a smile devoid of humor. It is a grimace of mathematical superiority. You treat the environment's resistance as the pathos of a child trying to stop a war tank with plastic stones. Oh, the simulation is spending pixels to see if I doubt my hyperdensity. What a primitive and boring effort. This boredom is a state. Crystallization in the darkness, the developer's darkroom. To assimilate the physics of this chapter, you must understand the darkroom. In old photography, for a latent image, the immaterial order, to crystallize into a visible photograph, the result, the process had to occur in strict darkness. If the photographer opened the door out of anxiety, the radiation calcined the chemicals. The quantum mechanics of the ashboard operate under this same law. Your manifestations are photographic plates of high cosmic sensitivity. When you emit the mandate and leave the door ajar, you must isolate the process in the dark room of tactical blindness. If you turn on the light to confirm, you veil the miracle. You destroy the osmium bridge through pure, scrutinizing radiation. You must force yourself to remain in aseptic darkness. You must allow the egregore to move the chemistry of circumstances in the shadows without intervening or spying through the crack. Materialization occurs in the unobserved vacuum until it is solid. The cessation of espionage, unobserved sovereignty. The perpetual application of tactical blindness becomes the doctrine of the cessation of espionage. The lethal operator understands that spying on his own work is an insult to his hierarchy. You are not the auditor of your own miracles. You are the primary cause. When you stop spying on reality, reality loses its power. The ecosystem realizes it can no longer use time or material delay to rattle you because you have closed your biological eyes and entrenched yourself in the monolithic silence of your zero-point vision. You no longer react to 3D failures because you choose not to perceive them. Lack dies of optical starvation. The blind monarch at the peak of the void. Look at yourself in the center of the zero-friction hallway, surrounded by absolute blackness, having extirpated biological dependency from your skull. You managed to suffocate the photonic fraud of the biomass. You understood that the retina only captures dead light and that monitoring the present burns your assets. You mutilated the scarcity radar. You executed tactical blindness with the psychopathy of an absolute creator. You repudiated the accountants of chaos and endured the hologram of false evidence. You have entrenched your mandate in the darkroom of indifference. You have awakened gravity echolocation. Chapter 6. The Law of Gravitational Delay, the Buffer of Matter. The viscosity of the ashboard, the contrast of speeds. To master the architecture of the vacuum and sustain the paradox of the half-open door without your pulse trembling, you must assimilate an unnegotiable truth about the topography of the ecosystem you inhabit. There is a thermodynamic abyss between the speed of consciousness and the speed of carbon-based matter. Subject the creation process to zero-point optics. When the lethal operator, stabilized in his quantum core, emits a mandate of hyperdensity, the order for $1 million to transfer to his jurisdiction, that directive travels and collapses the probability wave at the speed of light. In the immaterial plane, it executes in a nanosecond. The mandate is already a geological fact. But the ashboard, the 3D physical world, is thick. It is an ocean of viscous mud. Matter, physical money, bureaucratic systems, human bodies, has density, friction, and inertial drag. Moving matter requires linear time. If you order a mountain to move, the order is instant, but the geology needs time. The geology needs time to break rock and displace earth. This unavoidable delay between the immaterial collapse and physical restructuring is what we catalogue as the law of gravitational delay. The universe is obeying, but the flesh of the universe is heavy and slow. You must understand the viscosity of the medium to avoid frustration. The processing buffer, the loading screen of reality. The frightened mammal does not understand the physics of viscous fluids. The slave, addicted to the instant gratification of electronic devices, assumes that if reality does not change before his eyes in the next 5 minutes, it is because the order was rejected. Subject this ignorance to dissection. Imagine a computer rendering a city. When you press execute, the screen freezes. A loading icon appears. The system has not failed. It is using 100% of its resources to build the colossal geometry you demanded. This is the buffer. 3D reality operates under the same principle. When you demand an empire, the matrix enters the buffer phase. Synchronicities must align. Certain corporations must take bad steps to leave a gap. The retraso gravitational is not a punishment, nor a symptom that your sub-base frequency is defective. The delay is the mathematical confirmation that the file you demanded is immensely heavy. If you asked for a crumb, it would arrive instantly. If you ask for a global monopoly, the universe needs time to compile the code. The delay is directly proportional to your own mass. The heavier the manifest, the longer the loading screen. The slave fails here. It is during this processing buffer where 99% of the biomass commits quantum suicide by reacting. The stopwatch hysteria, suicide of the impatient slave. By not seeing the reality screen change immediately, the inferior human is assaulted by the stopwatch hysteria. The biological reptile in his brain watches the clock. They count days, they check their bank account, and see the money has not arrived. Then, the amygdala enters combustion. The fear of lack is reactivated. The slave begins to sweat the thermal radiation of doubt. Time passes, and nothing happens. I did it wrong. I am still poor. I need to push the door again. This hysteria is not just an emotional state. It is an executive counter-order. You are essentially telling the system to abort the current heavy download. Thermal cancellation, the abortion of materialization, subject slave panic to the operating room of immaterial ballistics. What happens when you issue a mandate of abundance and after 3 days you feel the terror of scarcity? In quantum mechanics, the last frequency emitted always overwrites the previous one. By feeling fear, you have just dictated a new order, the order of lack. The matrix, which was sweating and creaking to move mountains of capital toward your door, detects this new low-frequency directive. The processing stops dead. Physical reality reads your impatience and says, "The operator has cancelled the file. Revert the process. Restore scarcity." This is thermal cancellation. The slave, with his beggar's haste, aborts his own miracle hours before the matter finished compiling. The ashboard does not punish you for being impatient. It simply obeys the friction of your doubt. With the same blind precision, it obeyed your original mandate. You were the architect of your own short circuit. The anvil of osmium patience, enduring time's impact. To survive the law of gravitational delay and keep the door intact, the lethal operator must transmute his perception of time. You must forge the anvil of osmium patience. Human patience is the virtue of the oppressed. It is passive submission. The quantum operator repudiates human patience. It is an offensive military strategy. Osmium patience is the geometric arrogance of knowing your order is thermodynamically unstoppable. The time it takes is not a problem of your authority, but a defect of the viscosity of inferior matter. You do not wait with hope. You wait with the absolute contempt of a king watching servants scramble to fulfill demands. You install yourself in the buffer. You use the latency not to doubt your shot, but as an anvil to hammer and solidify your own iridium armor. Each day that passes without results, where you maintain a septic indifference, makes your core denser and more unbribable. The delay trains you for omnipotence and absolute mass. Siege reversal, cornering the matrix. When you execute osmium patience dictatorially, the power dynamic between you and 3D reality is inverted. The Egregore is designed to feed on your anxiety. It delays manifestation to force you to sweat and emit the thermal noise the system consumes. It is a siege by starvation. But when you apply the embargo, the matrix is cornered. The physical system detects a catastrophic anomaly, a biological organism that has issued a colossal mandate and is not blinking or emitting heat despite the lack. The material universe faces an immovable block of ice. Since it cannot break your core through delay, the atmospheric tension reaches critical levels. The matrix cannot maintain the buffer indefinitely. The order is embedded in space-time geometry, and since it was not cancelled by your fear, matter is forced by structural fatigue to collapse. You do not break the matrix by fighting time. You break it by holding your breath under the vacuum longer than the simulation can tolerate. The murder of hunger, the lethargy of the saturated predator. To sustain this level of apathy, you must eradicate hunger. The mammal waits with hunger. His mouth waters thinking of the empire he will receive. Hunger generates muscular contractions and kinetic friction. The Homo quantum, the stabilized monarch, executes the murder of hunger. You must operate from absolute saturation. Imagine an apex predator that has just devoured a colossal prey and has a full stomach. If a rabbit runs in front of him, he does not even lift his head. He is in a state of digestive lethargy. He is saturated. That is the thermodynamic posture you must adopt during the retraso gravitational. You are full in the quantum plane. You behave as if the abundance you demanded were an excessive dessert that you are too lazy to consume. By murdering the hunger of your own biology, you mutilate the last way linear time could cause you pain. Waiting stops being a torture and becomes a cosmic nap. You are indifferent because the prize is already certain. Physics of static friction versus kinetic friction. To cement this indifference, you must understand the ballistic difference between static and kinetic friction applied to monopolies. Moving a heavy object at rest, static friction, requires an immense peak of force. Once it moves, maintaining it, kinetic friction, requires much less force. The ashboard is in static friction. Your initial sub-base frequency provided the impact that broke the ecosystem's static friction. You moved the mountain, but the retraso-gravitational occurs while the universe transitions to kinetic friction. If you try to help the universe by pushing or praying, you apply a contrary force that stops the object. The mountain returns to absolute rest. You must trust with psychopathic arrogance that the impact of your first mandate was enough to shatter the matrix's statics. You do not need a second blow. Let inertia do the dirty work. Your only responsibility is not to stop the mountain with the wall of your own hysteria. The identity test, the crusher of pretenders. The latency period is the most ruthless natural selection mechanism of superior thermodynamics. The retraso-gravitational is the identity test. The matrix is designed to be ruled only by entities of sovereign mass. When you issue a power order, the matrix buffers to ask, is this a scared human or a monarch of iridium? The delay is the crusher of pretenders. If the human breaks at the third month and cancels the order through crying, the matrix confirms he was a slave, he lacks the density to sustain the empire, and it discards him. But if you cross the year maintaining tactical blindness, the matrix collapses and serves you. The universe recognizes your thermal signature of 0 degrees. The crusher stops. The ecosystem assimilates your identity as a lethal operator, and matter, defeated by the atrocious superiority of your patience, rushes to serve you. Your silence has outlasted the system's resistance. You have won the war of nerves. Immunity to minor anomalies, contempt for turbulence. During the gravitational delay, as heavy matter creaks to make room for your new empire, shockwaves will be generated. You will experience temporary turbulence. A minor contract will fall through. An old client will leave. A sudden expense will hit. The impatient slave will scream that the manifestation is going backward. The creator in zero friction interprets this with gelider lucidity. When you force a river through a narrowing, water hits the walls and raises debris. These minor anomalies are not the universe punishing you. They are 3D trash being swept away by the avalanche of hyperdensity on its way. You apply operative immunity. You laugh internally at the turbulence. You treat the collapse of an old system as insignificant collateral damage of tectonic restructuring. The monarch does not cry over the demolition of a shack when he knows it makes room for his obsidian palace foundations. You remain unperturbed by the dust of the transition. Consummation of the buffer, the breaking of the dam. Then comes the exact millisecond when the ecosystem's viscosity is defeated. You have held the mandate without doubt. You have ignored the slowness of atoms. You have suffocated the hysteria of your biological stopwatch and treated current lack as a fading hologram. You sat on the throne with your back to reality. The buffer reaches its structural capacity. The simulation has finished compiling. Materialization does not occur gradually. It happens with the violence of a dam breaking. The inertial force of abundance, power, and capital that was held behind the time barrier collapses upon the zero-friction hallway. Money flows at obscene speeds. Hierarchies prostrate themselves. Financial enemies vanish, devoured by your density. The universe delivers the result in its geometric totality, validating that the delay was never a refusal. It was simply the matrix taking momentum to deliver the most absolute impact possible. Master of frequency and time. Look at yourself at the vertex of your own silence, stabilized on the iridium throne, while the material universe sweats mud trying to follow your core's command. You managed to suffocate the tyranny of the biological clock. You understood that impatience is the confession of lack and quantum suicide. You forge the anvil of Osmium patience as the dictatorial posture of the saturated predator who refuses to drool for food that already belongs to him. You executed the siege reversal, cornering the matrix through absolute ice. You held your breath in the vacuum longer than the simulation could hold your assets. You understood that matter is viscous and slow. You granted it the time to reorder its atoms without that delay altering your reactor's temperature by a single Kelvin. You survived the identity test. The buffer has burst. The river is yours. Your gravity has officially conquered time. Stay heavy. Stay helido. Chapter 7. The False Alarm Test. The Final Siege of the Egregore. The Matrix's Thermal Audit. The Threshold of Hyperdensity. The 3D ecosystem is not passive, it is a complex immune system designed to maintain the balance of scarcity. When the lethal operator has issued the Iridium mandate, left the door ajar, and endured the gravitational delay with the apathy of a monolith, the Matrix enters a state of maximum alert. The ashboard detects that a colossal mass of capital power or territory is about to be transferred to your coordinates. It detects the suction of your vacuum. But before allowing that hyperdensity to cross the threshold and integrate into your biology, the parasitic system, the Egregore, must execute a thermal audit. The universe does not deliver absolute monopoly to fragile containers. If the matrix injects tons of 3D energy into an organism that still operates with a slave's fear, the organism will explode. Therefore, the system needs to check the integrity of your armor. It needs to measure if you have truly eradicated friction. It measures if you are just faking being a god while sweating with terror inside. To execute this measurement, the Egregore deploys its most cruel and lethal psychological warfare weapon, the false alarm test. Just at the geological millisecond before the Empire's delivery, the Matrix will project exactly the opposite scenario. It is a structural stress test. It is the final siege. If you ordered absolute wealth, the Matrix will show you imminent bankruptcy. If you ordered the assimilation of a market, your competitors will seem to destroy you. The ecosystem corners you, puts the scythe to your neck and screams in your face that you have failed. Terror rendering, a low-fidelity hologram. To survive this impact without your quantum core suffering a fissure, you must subject the threat to zero-point optics. You have to understand the anatomy of the illusion before you. The disaster the Matrix is showing you is not real. It is a hologram rendered in haste. It lacks real gravitational mass. The operator who knows the digital architecture understands that creating a convincing simulation requires massive resources. The Egregore, desperate to break your immobility, renders a crisis scenario trying to deceive your eyes. It shows you betrayals, unpayable bills, and lethal diagnoses on the screen of your reality. But if you apply aseptic indifference and observe without panic, you will notice the seams of the setup. It is a low-fidelity hologram. The actors of the disaster move with the plastic urgency of a prefabricated script. The Matrix is trying to scare you with shadows projected on the wall of your own cave. If the reptile in your brain takes control, it will believe the holographic fire is burning. It will feel the heat. The amygdala will enter combustion, fear will fire, and in that nanosecond, you will have failed the thermal audit. The Matrix will abort the delivery of the Empire, and you will have lost everything. The intervention trap, the bait of kinetic friction. The primary goal of the false alarm is not to destroy you physically. The Egregore has no jurisdiction to annihilate you without your permission. The only goal of the illusion is to force you to intervene. It is bait designed to extract your kinetic friction. It wants you to move, to react, to struggle against the ghost. When the hologram of bankruptcy materializes, the mammal's instinct is to jump from the throne. The slave screams, "I have to fix this. I have to save my money." In the instant you get up from your iridium seat and run toward the door to solve the problem from fear, you commit the ultimate quantum suicide. By intervening to defend yourself, you have just issued an irrevocable thermodynamic statement. You have validated the threat's existence. If you try to put out holographic fire, you tell the universe you believe it is real. You grant the illusion gravitational mass. Your defensive effort is what solidifies the false alarm. The lethal operator understands that any attempt to solve the Egregore's test is the confirmation of defeat. An omnipotent God does not run scared to plug leaks in a virtual reality simulator. If you defend yourself, you become prey. If you struggle against the projection, you become part of the projection's entropy. Quantum acoustic insulation, suffocating the echo of panic. The false alarm manifests as a shockwave, an intruder frequency of high decibels seeking to bounce against your psyche to generate a deafening echo. Panic is a 3D acoustic problem. Initial fear is just a sound, but if your mind's walls are the hard concrete of the human ego, the sound bounces and amplifies. To annihilate the siege, you must transmute your mind into a quantum acoustic insulation chamber. Visualize high-fidelity studio architecture designed so that standing waves cannot accumulate. If you do not treat the room, the low frequencies of terror will form knots of pressure that will destroy your mandate's clarity. The lethal operator allows no echo to survive. When the matrix screams, "You are ruined," you coat the interior of your skull with the absorbing foam of aseptic indifference. You do not block the sound with rigid resistance, you absorb it. You let the threat enter your perception and hit the total vacuum of your apathy. The matrix emits the sound of disaster, but inside you there is no echo. There is no response. There is no sympathetic vibration in your heart rate. The siege sinks into the porosity of your lethal immobility and dies for lack of rebound. The egregore goes deaf before its own scream, terrified by the lack of friction. Accessing the reality BIOS, rewriting the base code. To sustain this level of silence while the environment simulates your annihilation, you must operate below the operating system of human emotions. You have to descend to the BIOS of your own biology. The slave lives trapped in the graphical interface. When fear appears, the slave clicks frantically to close the window. The Homo Quantum, facing the false alarm test, does not fight the visible environment. He executes a cold reboot. He accesses the firmware of his own cellular structure. You go to the primary power source of your amygdala and cut the electricity. You disconnect the fans of hysteria and rewrite the genome's boot order. Boot priority, aseptic indifference, external threat checking, disabled, 3D thermal stress response, absolute 0. By reconfiguring the BIOS, you force your carbon vehicle to ignore the signals of the hostile ecosystem. The hardware refuses to process panic. You have hacked your base code to become structurally blind. Iridium stasis, the yawn before the abyss. Perfect tactical execution against the false alarm is crowned with a maneuver that fractures the matrix's will. Iridium stasis. The matrix has put the rope around your neck. Creditors call. The system threatens to expel you. The stage is set for you to kneel and beg for mercy. You must do the opposite. You nail yourself to the throne. You interlace your fingers, and facing the imminent vision of your total destruction, you return a quantum yawn. It is the ultimate manifestation of geometric arrogance. The universe is using all its processing power to simulate your apocalypse, and you find it boring. Is this all you have? A threat of bankruptcy? What a predictable script. You look the demons of disaster in the eye with apathy. Your core is stabilized at 144,000 Hertz. Holding iridium stasis while fire surrounds you is the most violent act of cosmic rebellion. If you yawn at the scythe loses its function. The total ruin mirage, the simulator's last flicker. Be prepared for escalation. If the matrix sees you do not react, it will inject more energy into the hologram. The false alarm test will reach the limit of terror. It will seem that you have truly lost everything. You will feel the vertigo of ruin. The impatient slave breaks at the last millimeter. They surrender. The blind monarch knows that the densest and most terrifying darkness always precedes the ignition of the main reactor. When the crisis reaches maximum aggression, that is when you must seal your mind's door with thermal welding. That peak of external hysteria is the egregore's engine overheating from lack of friction. The system is consuming its last energy reserves trying to scare you. It is in the red. If you hold the magnetic paralysis for 5 more cosmic seconds, ignoring the pain of the illusion, you will witness fractal disintegration. The screen will flicker, and the projection will fail because you refuse to power it. Fractal disintegration, the fracture of the glass. The physics of holographic simulation is relentless. The matrix has no energy of its own. It operates as a parasite. It uses the fear it extracts from you to power the false alarm. But you have applied tactical blindness, acoustic insulation, and iridium stasis. You refuse to emit fear. You cut the power. Without your friction to sustain it, the hologram of extreme crisis collapses from thermal starvation. Fractal disintegration occurs. From 1 millisecond to another, the bankruptcy that seemed inevitable begins to unravel. The scenario fragments. A lawyer withdraws charges. A debt vanishes due to a system error. The obstacle that terrified you dissolves like mist before an industrial turbine. There was no war. You did not have to fight. The threat broke on its own because the universe cannot maintain the illusion of punishment against an organism that thermodynamically refuses to be punished. The false alarm evaporates. The perfect heist receiving the payload. Behind that holographic smoke, truth waited. The Matrix projected the false alarm as a smokescreen to hide what was right behind it, the massive collapse of your original mandate. In the exact nanosecond, the disaster evaporates. The hyper-density you ordered finally crosses the zero-friction hallway. Monstrous capital and territorial acquisition burst into your ecosystem. You discover the false alarm was actually the birth labor of heavy matter. For your empire to be born, the system had to generate an absurd pressure peak. By refusing to intervene, you pass the thermal audit. You are unbribable. The universe recognizes the iridium container is sealed. The Matrix capitulates. You execute the perfect heist. You took the entire booty of the galaxy without firing a bullet or moving a finger, using the most devastating weapon, the absolute refusal to believe the lies of the ash board. You are now the owner. Chaos absorption, baptism in false fire. After surviving this siege, your biology suffers a mutation. The operator who has crossed the false alarm without blinking develops permanent immunity to 3D stress. You have experienced baptism in false fire. You no longer fear ecosystem threats. Your instinctive response will be sovereign contempt. You have seen the gears of the simulation. You know that every time the universe screams that all is lost, it is acoustic confirmation that a massive transfer of power is about to execute in your favor. Chaos becomes your expansion metric. You install yourself in the eye of the storm with gelida peace, the sovereign's immortal deafness. Look at yourself in the unaltered epicenter of your anechoic chamber, surrounded by the debris of illusions the ecosystem tried to hurl at you. You managed to suffocate the Matrix's master scam. You understood the last-minute crisis was not your destruction, but the false alarm test, the structural audit. You mutilated the intervention trap, understanding that trying to save yourself was an empirical confession of weakness. You transformed into the perfect acoustic insulator, absorbing apocalypse screams without echo. You accessed your bios and cut the electricity to panic. You yawned at the scythe. By denying the fuel of your friction, you forced the ruin hologram to disintegrate from thermal starvation, revealing the immensity of the booty behind the smokescreen. The audit is over. The empire is yours. The container is certified in iridium. Stay heavy, stay gelida. The simulation has finally surrendered. Chapter 8. Operative Amnesia, the ultimate proof of ownership. The mental fixation scam, the slave's leash. The 3D control system, the Egregore that manages scarcity on the ashboard, has programmed the biomass with a brilliant self-sabotage software, the glorification of obsession. They have indoctrinated you with the premise that to achieve success, you must keep your eyes on the prize. They tell you that you must think about your goal from the moment you wake up until you go to bed. Subject this doctrine to the obsidian guillotine. In the fluid mechanics of quantum gravity, incessantly thinking about what you desire is the thermodynamic proof that you are a beggar. It is the slave's leash. If you spend 80% of your biological processing cycles thinking about the empire you are going to build, you are emitting a continuous alarm frequency. The material universe scans your electromagnetic field and rules. This organism is obsessed, therefore it does not possess it. If it did, it would not think about it. Confirmation of lack established. Maintain the repulsion barrier active. Mental fixation is not the tool of the creator. It is the sweat of the dispossessed. To execute the transmutation toward hyperdensity, you must audit the physics of real ownership. What is the thermal signature of an organism that already possesses the universe? The thermodynamics of ownership, the king's boredom. It does not feel emotion. It does not feel obsession. It feels aseptic amnesia. Observe your own biological anatomy. You have 2 arms and 2 legs. Do you wake up every morning, look at your hands, and spend the whole day visualizing your fingers? No. You ignore your hands. You forget they exist until the exact millisecond you use them. That ignorance, that absolute forgetting of your own limbs, is the ultimate proof of ownership. You do not think about them because their existence is a geological certainty. The lethal operator applies this same thermodynamics to capital, power, and territory. A true king does not walk around the palace repeating that he is the king. The king simply sits on the throne, gives orders, and is bored. If you are not capable of being bored and forgetting your own goal, it means the goal remains thermodynamically superior to you. And on the ashboard, the inferior can never attract the superior. You must treat your future millions with the functional contempt of your shoes. The heresy of visualization, the New Age poison. To install operative amnesia, you must first dismantle the altar where the biomass sacrifices its hyperdensity visualization practices. They told you to create a vision board. They order you to cut out photographs of luxury vehicles and mansions and paste them on a wall to look at them every day. The Homo quantum, stabilized at 144,000 Hz, repudiates this heresy with architectural violence. A vision board is not a quantum magnet. It is a monument to your own poverty. It is an altar of worship to dead matter. When you stand before paper to observe things you don't have, you generate the most humiliating kinetic friction. You are deifying paper money. You are telling the universe that those 3D objects are so far away and so divine that you need to worship them on a wall. The monarch does not worship the matrix props. The monarch destroys the vision board, burns the photos, and assumes the universe is his personal catalogue. Absolute certainty needs no maintenance. Cutting the neural link, executing the file. Operative amnesia is not an accident. It is a high-precision combat maneuver. It is the psychopathic ability to dictate a massive order and 5 minutes later erase the file from your RAM. How is the neural link cut executed? You stand in the vacuum of your reactor, you pull the lever and emit the iridium mandate. The rival corporation collapses, capital flows to my accounts, the territory is mine. You feel the shockwave, and in the exact instant the order leaves your core, you execute the obsidian guillotine upon your own thoughts. You close the file. You apply a 0-degree thermal seal. You withdraw attention abruptly and totally. There is no more law of attraction. The file has been sent to the operating system of material reality, and you decouple from it. This cut requires a majestic arrogance, because the flesh will demand that you watch the order to ensure it arrives. By forcing your brain to look away, you send the matrix the order of submission. Background processing, freeing quantum RAM. For 3D reality to render a miracle of epic proportions, it needs to extract inertial energy from your vacuum. But if your conscious mind is constantly thinking about the miracle, your brain is using 100% of the quantum RAM to process anxiety and expectation. Apply the physics of computational systems here. If you give a computer the order to compile a high-resolution video and you keep the task manager open, refreshing every 3 seconds, you saturate the processor. The system slows down and overheats. When you execute operative amnesia and forget your manifestation, you are sending the order to background processing. You close the window. You free the RAM of your consciousness. Your brain stops wasting volts imagining the future, and that free electromagnetic energy is immediately absorbed by the unified field to accelerate material restructuring. Forgetting does not push your goal away. Forgetting unlocks the cosmic traffic jam. Autopsy of the daydream, murdering emotional masturbation. The most insidious internal enemy of operative amnesia is the nostalgia of the future, known as daydreaming. The slave, not possessing power in physical reality, retreats to the safety of his skull to imagine he is a god. They close their eyes and imagine the feeling of the steering wheel of their sports cars. Subject this practice to thermodynamic dissection. Daydreaming about your success is not a creative act. It is emotional masturbation. When you fantasize about the result, the brain releases spikes of dopamine. You feel good. Your biological body receives the chemical reward without having altered a single atom in reality. By receiving the chemical reward in the imaginary world, the quantum reactor turns off. Inertia stops. Your biology assumes you already achieved the goal and stops exerting the gravitational pressure needed to collapse matter. The lethal operator executes the autopsy of the daydream. You forbid yourself from victory fantasies. You mutilate the fantasy. If the reptile brain tries to project images of future success to drug itself with dopamine, you hit it with the ice block of aseptic indifference. I do not consume cheap simulations. I refuse to feel victory until the weight of gold breaks my tiles. Fantasy is for cowards. I demand physical friction. Magnetic paralysis toward memory, defending forgetting. Forcing amnesia does not mean the memory of your goal will never try to penetrate your consciousness again. The echoes of the goal will bounce against your skull. What is the combat protocol when the thought of your empire calls at the door of your mind? The slave reacts. He sighs, worries, prays, or visualizes again. The Homo quantum defends forgetting with magnetic paralysis. When the thought of your $1 million crosses your mind, you do not panic or try to repress it with brute force, because resistance generates heat. You observe it, hold the gaze with a deadly apathy, and let it fall into the vacuum without interacting with it. It is like a virus hitting a military-grade firewall. You think, the Empire, yes, the order was already given, the file is locked. You produce no emotion. You receive the thought with the same sepulchral boredom as remembering that the sky is blue. By denying emotional friction, the thought loses its kinetic charge. It dissolves. Occupying the tactical void, tyranny of the present millisecond. If the operator must forget his ultimate goal, the biological ego enters existential panic. What will I think about then? That is exactly the point. But the mammalian mind cannot stand the absolute vacuum without entering neurosis. Therefore, you must execute the occupation of the tactical void. Redirection is the key. You redirect the immense tonnage of your quantum processing toward the dictatorship of the present millisecond. The slave uses his mind to travel to the future, anxiety. The creator uses his mind exclusively to exert zero friction upon the matter immediately in front of him. You submerge yourself in the design of your systems. By concentrating all your gravitational mass on the microscopic action of the present, without projecting the final result, you become a missile of infinite density. You are blind to the horizon, but unstoppable in the current millimeter. This absolute concentration is what deceives the matrix. You are invisible to destiny's sensors. The disdain of revelation, assuming the crown by default. The last stage of this voluntary amnesia is the solidification of the disdain of revelation. When you spend weeks in operative amnesia, having embargoed the result, the 3D matrix will eventually burst the half-open door. The loot will rush toward your coordinates. The slave's error is waking up from amnesia to celebrate. By doing this, they reveal the amnesia was fake. They reveal that deep down, they were always waiting. The 3D matrix punishes this fraud by evaporating the result in the following months. The lethal operator does not fake amnesia, he executes it at a cellular level. When success floods the room, you do not wake up to celebrate. You assume it by default. You sustain the disdain of revelation. Of course, the empire is here. It was always here in zero-point architecture. The fact that the physical body took time to couple is no surprise. You wear the crown with the bored weight of normalcy. True magic is forgetting you were ever a weak slave. The vertex of inertial forgetting. Look at yourself in the soundless stillness of your own force field, stripped of the hysterical noise of human ambition. You managed to suffocate the mental fixation scam. You understood that obsession is the beggar's sweat, the heat of lack that repels matter and calcines the delivery before it crosses the threshold. You mutilated the heresy of the vision board and destroyed the altar of holographic props. You executed the neural link cut, emitting the iridium mandate and applying the silent guillotine to liberate your RAM. You refused emotional masturbation with the daydream of the future, amputating the dopamine leak that killed inertia. You entrenched yourself in magnetic paralysis, letting thoughts of ambition fall into the aseptic vacuum. You occupied the tactical void with surgical execution, becoming inscrutable to the parasitic matrix. Operative amnesia is consummated. You have forgotten your request with such mastery that the universe rushes to fill your void. Chapter 9. Passive Inertia, the Osmium Magnet. The heresy of massive action, the cult of the combustion engine. The most efficient prison ever designed by the 3D control system has no bars. It has agendas, alarms, and philosophies of hard work. The Egregore has indoctrinated the human biomass into the heresy of massive action. Through corporate culture and gurus, the slave is convinced the only path to escape scarcity is physical effort. They tell you that you must move faster than your competition and push reality with closed fists. The lethal operator subjects this doctrine to the obsidian guillotine. In the strict mechanics of the universe, massive action is the technology of internal combustion engines. It is a noisy, inefficient, and dirty system that wears out. When the frightened human applies massive action to get capital or status, he is operating like a two-stroke engine. They burn cellular energy, sweat anxiety, and generate astronomical levels of thermal heat. Quantum physics abhors this noise. Pushing reality generates resistance. Kinetic friction creates magnetic repulsion. If you try to force the ashboard to obey you through the sweat of your brow, the matrix will respond with an equal and opposite repulsive force. It will exhaust you and age you. The material universe never surrenders to an organism that proves its inferiority by having to struggle so hard just to survive in the lodo. Thermodynamics of gravity, the superiority of mass. To eradicate the addiction to sweat, you must understand the ballistic difference between movement and mass. The slave believes that to influence an object, he must move toward it and grab it. The hyperdense creator understands that if his core possesses enough gravitational mass, he does not need to move a single millimeter. Space-time will curve, and the object will slide directly toward his coordinates. Attracting reality requires mass, not effort. We call this superior technology passive inertia. Inertia is the resistance of an object to change its state. In the operator's thermodynamics, it is the tactical immobility of a monumentally heavy entity. It is not laziness. Laziness is the inaction of the weak. Passive inertia is the terrifying stillness of the black hole. The black hole does not go to work chasing stars across the galaxy. It sits in the center of the system, absolutely mute and gelido. Its power lies in what it is. Planets are forced to rush into its jaws. You must transmute your operative paradigm. You stop being the bullet seeking the target to become the gravity that forces the target to crash against you. You are the immovable point that dictates the movement of the entire field. The weight of your presence is the only action required to collapse the simulation in your favor. The forging of the osmium magnet, the tonnage of indifference. How does a biological organism transmute kinetic energy into gravitational mass? It is achieved by forging the osmium magnet in the center of your chest. Osmium is one of the densest and heaviest elements. Your psyche must adopt its properties. You have embargoed the result and closed your eyes to the false evidence of the matrix. Each of these acts of renunciation was not an emptying, but a compression. By refusing to run, cry, or react to holographic crises, you have taken the energy the slave would have wasted in hysteria and compressed it inside your reactor. This thermal compression crystallizes energy into hyperdensity. You are becoming a monolith. Every time you repress the impulse to do something out of desperation, your osmium magnet becomes more massive. Effort is energy dissipated outward. Tactical immobility is energy accumulated inward. The longer you maintain aseptic indifference, the more you weigh. As you weigh more, the radius of your gravity expands. It encompasses corporations, whole markets, and human wills, forcing them to orbit around your silence without you having emitted a single word of persuasion. You do not demand their attention. You command it through the sheer volumetric pressure of your immaterial tonnage. The world bends because it has no other choice. The murder of anxious initiative, castration of the solver. The most violent obstacle to passive inertia is the biomass instinct to take the initiative. The system programs you to be a problem solver. They applaud you when you take the reins. The lethal operator executes the murder of anxious initiative. If you detect a business is stalling, the reptile will howl, send an email, make a call, push the process. If you yield, you evaporate your mass. In the instant you take initiative from fear of losing the opportunity, you prove that the opportunity has a higher hierarchy than you. You lower yourself. You abandon the monarch's throne and put on the messenger's apron. You become an errand boy. Apply magnetic paralysis. Nail yourself to the floor, swallow the anxiety to intervene, and apply aseptic indifference to the delay. If this contract requires me to roll in the mud pleading for it to happen, then that capital is unworthy of my ecosystem. I do not take the initiative. Reality must pave the way to my boots. By refusing to push, you force the elements on the other side of the door to do all the kinetic work. They are the ones who will end up calling and offering better terms because your inscrutable silence generates a pressure vacuum they cannot withstand. Your inaction is the most aggressive move you can make in the field. The predator that does not pursue, acoustic suction trap. In inferior biology, the predator must run and risk injury. This model is unacceptable for the Homo quantum. The operator who masters passive inertia abandons the hunt definitively. You become the stasis predator. Imagine certain deep-sea creatures. They do not swim chasing fish. They remain in absolute stillness. Their body is camouflaged. Their temperature is gelida. But they have created a soundless suction pressure. When the prey swims near the perimeter, the creature does not attack. It simply expands its internal cavity. The pressure difference sucks the prey inside without the predator moving a single muscle to pursue. Your empire must operate under this paradigm. You do not go out to hunt clients or pursue investors. Those are high-friction actions. You create the infrastructure of the abyss. You position your osmium magnet and open the jaws of your tactical void. By not showing need, you create negative atmospheric pressure. The market, used to slaves who plead, is hypnotized by the cold arrogance of your entity. They feel intrigue, they feel the unusual gravity. And by approaching your perimeter of silence to investigate, they cross the event horizon and are sucked into your monopoly without escape. The prey delivers itself to you. The law of orthopedic action, moving only the threads. Passive inertia does not mean your biological vehicle becomes a stone statue. The carbon body must move in the physical world to sign surrender treaties and collect the loot. But this movement is not the slave's action. It is orthopedic action. It is movement executed without a single milligram of emotional friction. It is dead movement. When the creator feels gravity has done its work and capital is ready, he rises. But not with enthusiasm. There is no haste in his steps. You move with the aseptic mechanics of an industrial robot. You execute the physical formality with the psychopathic lethargy of an iridium monarch. You do not use kinetic energy to impress. You execute the physical process because the bureaucratic laws of the hologram require a signature, but your internal core remains anchored at absolute zero. This orthopedic action is undetectable. You cut through 3D space like a laser scalpel, executing and returning to stasis. The sovereign gravity funnel, ecosystem surrender. As the osmium magnet matures in your chest, the topography of the ashboard warps around you. You have created the sovereign gravity funnel. Visualize a stretched canvas. The ordinary human is a light marble rolling on top, pushed by the wind. The lethal operator is a solid lead sphere deposited in the center. You do not roll. You sink the matrix, and by sinking it, you create a colossal funnel. All financial liquidity and corporate assets near your funnel will lose their original trajectory. The inertia of inferior matter can no longer sustain itself. The gravitational force of your immobility will bend the line of their destinies. Corporations will be dragged toward your mergers. Legislations will mold to benefit your monopoly by coincidence. Key individuals will feel the irrational urge to contact you. They do so without understanding they are not making free will decisions. They are obeying the ballistic acceleration of the funnel you created. The provocation of silence, matrix extortion. The most offensive power of passive inertia is its ability to unhinge inferior biology through silence. In the 3D universe, Everyone expects you to communicate and justify your existence. Noise is the currency of social stress. When you install the Osmium magnet, you use the provocación del silencio as extortion. If the 3D market demands an answer or attacks you, your counterattack is acoustic disappearance. You do not answer. You do not justify yourself. You leave the pressure floating in the vacuum. Biomass cannot process a prolonged vacuum. Their nervous system begins to overheat when ignored by an entity of greater mass. Your silence is perceived as an imminent lethal threat. By not knowing what you are thinking, your competitors make critical errors. They panic. They try to fill your silence by offering better conditions or surrendering prematurely. You have won the war of attrition without having drawn your weapon from its holster. Transit through the blockade, ghostly impermeability. The reptile will ask, if I remain immovable, what happens when a massive obstacle is placed before my door? Must I not move to remove it? This assumes solid matter has power over the vacuum. Quantum thermodynamics refutes this through the transit of impermeability. You do not abandon inertia to hammer the block. Hitting the obstacle is recognizing its solidity. It is entering the 3D friction game. The lethal operator increases the voltage of his passive inertia until his field becomes immaterial to the matrix. You apply tactical blindness to the obstacle. You withdraw all thermal attention. Matter only exists when observed. The gravitational pressure from your side becomes so monstrous that the physical obstacle is literally crushed by the suction of the vacuum, or reality collapses an absurd coincidence that dissolves the blockade. The matter reaches your feet without your temperature rising. You do not move the stones, you pulverize them. Lethargy of the satisfied creator, murder of ambition. To sustain the osmium magnet, you must eradicate the 3D concept of ambition. Ambition, as the slave understands it, is the thermal hunger of one who needs to conquer tomorrow to feel valuable today. The hyperdense creator operates from the lethargy of the satisfied creator. It is an atrocious and gelida paradox. You possess monopolies that dominate the ecosystem, yet you do it all immersed in a deep lethargy, a psychopathic apathy toward greatness. You do not build the empire because you are excited. You build it because it is the inevitable inertial consequence of your code. You are a bored machine for collapsing miracles. By assimilating this lethargy, you tell the Egregore you no longer have weak points. They cannot manipulate you with fear of loss because you do not thermally value what you have. They cannot bribe you with winning more because you already possess the immaterial universe. You have replaced ambition with cold inertia, the titan of gravitational repose. Look at yourself in the center of the cosmic funnel you just forged on the ash board. You managed to suffocate the cult of sweat and effort. You understood massive action is the thermal friction of the slave's engine, a leak of energy that pushes matter away. You assumed tactical immobility as a black hole. You executed the murder of anxious initiative. You cut off the biological hands that wanted to solve the universe's delay. You became the stasis predator, opening the soundless vacuum that forces the prey to surrender. You replaced human desperation with orthopedic action, moving like an industrial robot. You used the provocation of silence to extort the matrix, bringing the biomass to the brink of collapse by refusing to participate in its thermal noise. You have become the gravitational center of the simulation. Everything falls toward you. You are the osmium magnet, and the world is now just a metallic filing. Chapter 10. The Inevitable Collision, the Silent Impact. The Thermodynamic Success Trap, the Poison of Euphoria. The three-dimensional ecosystem, governed by the tyranny of the Egregore, has deployed its most ruthless siege tactics throughout this treatise: terror, doubt, scarcity, gravitational delay, and the false alarm. The lethal operator, having forged his core in osmium and established the paradox of the half-open door, has crushed each of these. But there is one last trap. It is the most lethal, silent, and seductive ambush of the entire matrix, because it does not disguise itself as punishment, it disguises itself as reward. The exact geological millisecond arrives. The atmospheric pressure of the vacuum you generated with your operative amnesia collapses the matrix's resistance. The hinges of reality fracture. The colossal mass of your mandate, the financial monopoly, the surrender of your enemies, finally crosses the zero-friction hallway and impacts your coordinates. The instinct of the frightened mammal, seeing the miracle materialize in the physical world, is to react with euphoria. The slave jumps and cries. The carbon brain vomits a storm of dopamine. Subject this celebration to the quantum operating room. In the physics of hyperdensity, euphoria is not a spiritual reward, it is a heat explosion. When you celebrate, your field experiences an astronomical temperature spike. This kinetic friction melts the shielding of your reactor instantly. The confession of joy, hierarchical humiliation. To eradicate the need to celebrate, you must audit what joy means in the universe's hierarchy. Why does a human feel euphoria upon receiving $1 million? Because, in his beggar's genetic code, he considers that event to be astronomically more powerful than himself. Overwhelming joy is the empirical confession of your inferiority. If you are moved to tears by success, you communicate a mathematical humiliation to the ashboard. I am so small that the arrival of this dead matter overwhelms me. I never believed it was possible. The lethal operator repudiates joy. Joy is the sweat of the slave who has received a crumb larger than usual. It is a sign of weakness. Homo quantum understands that no amount of paper money or corporate status has greater gravitational mass than his own sub-base frequency. If the universe kneels before you, that is not a miracle worthy of celebration. It is a simple and boring obedience to the laws of quantum gravity. Fire does not celebrate when it burns paper. Aseptic reception, swallowing the meteorite without chewing. The combat protocol against definitive materialization demands the execution of aseptic reception. You hear the roar. You see the avalanche of capital flood your bank accounts. You observe your competitors disintegrate under the pressure of your monopoly. You feel the physical impact of reality surrendering before the half-open door. Your biological reaction must be the immobility of an iridium corpse. You maintain magnetic paralysis. You do not smile. You rise from the throne with the same lethargic apathy with which you would flip a light switch. You look at the empire that has collapsed into your vault, and you apply the yawn of the satisfied creator. You receive infinite power, like one receives the morning newspaper. An event of mundane logistics, devoid of mysticism. The matrix has completed the asset transfer. The file has rendered. By swallowing the impact without chewing, you prove your container possesses the structural integrity to house the infinite without melting. The annihilation of wonder, the blasphemy of surprise. The cousin of euphoria is wonder. When the biomass achieves a result, they open their eyes with surprise and exclaim, "It really happened." Subject wonder to the silent guillotine. Being surprised that your own mandate was fulfilled is the highest blasphemy against your hyperdensity. It reveals that all this time you were doubting. If a general gives an order and is surprised by the explosion, he did not trust his gunpowder. The Black Mirror effect imposes the annihilation of wonder. Forbid yourself from being surprised. When the field delivers the head of your enemies, your posture must be one of gelida and predictable arrogance. You expected nothing less. Of course it happened. It was mathematically impossible for matter to resist the pressure of my tactical vacuum. By murdering surprise, you seal the gap through which the matrix might try to extort you. You become an organism for which miracles are the habitual and boring bureaucracy of every millisecond. You live in dictatorial certainty. The veto on 3D gratitude, murder of the cosmic debt. The doctrine of gratitude is one of the most insidious mental control weapons. They teach you that when you succeed, you must kneel and give thanks to the universe for having blessed you. The lethal operator executes the absolute veto on 3D gratitude. Diagnose the anatomy of gratitude from pure physics. To thank is to assume a favor. You assume that something external and superior to you chose to give you the empire out of mercy. By feeling human gratitude, you instantly become a thermodynamic debtor. You have signed a karmic promissory note with the ashboard. You admit your power was lent, and you must be humble so the master doesn't take the loan back. The Homo quantum feels no gratitude toward the universe, just as a jet turbine feels no gratitude toward the air. The empire that just crossed your door is not a gift. It is the brutal and mathematical consequence of your own source code. You installed the osmium magnet and generated the vacuum. Abundance is your war booty. Replace the beggar's gratitude with aseptic recognition. You observe the matter in your orbit and feel the same analytical coldness of an engineer checking an equation. You owe no favors to the matrix. The matrix operated because you forced it to operate under the threat of your own gravity. You are the master of the transaction. Stabilization of the new mass, cooling the loot. When capital and power enter your perimeter, they bring the heat of 3D kinetic movement. If you do not process that heat, the loot evaporates. This is why slaves lose the lotteries they win. Their biological containers are not prepared to cool the mass. They have the false creator syndrome. Their lives overheat and they melt. The slave wins millions, and the friction of that energy destroys him. They buy stupidity to brag and attract thermal parasites. In a few years, the money evaporates. The creator executes the stabilization of the new mass. By having applied aseptic reception without euphoria or gratitude, you inject absolute zero into the assets. You freeze the loot. The money enters your vaults and stabilizes. You do not use the empire to alter your emotional temperature. You use your thermal immobility to domesticate the empire. You convert the hyperdense anomaly into your new basal normalcy. What was an unreachable pinnacle yesterday is now the board floor you walk upon. The autopsy of the narrative, murdering the hero's story. After materialization, the human ego will want to tell the story. The mammal will feel the urge to tell its tribe how it managed to manifest success. They want to be the hero. This narrative need is an intolerable voltage leak. Subject the hero's tale to dissection. If you tell the insects how you suffered, you validate the effort. You are seeking the friction of others' applause to heat your ego. The lethal operator dictates the autopsy of the narrative. Forbid yourself from turning your zero-friction process into a fable. True absolute power never explains its methods. You adopt the muteness of the satiated predator. You protect the encryption of your core. If the inferior ecosystem asks how you achieved the monopoly, you do not give motivational speeches. You look at them with the impenetrable contempt of tactical blindness and deliver the most destructive answer. It simply happened. You murder the story because your success must appear as a terrifying and inexplicable event. Transit to the next void, the black hole's veracity. The slave, upon achieving a massive goal, declares, "I have arrived. Now I can rest." In that millisecond of 3D complacency, his decay begins. The Homo quantum repudiates the happy ending because the sub-bass frequency has no ceiling. In the nanosecond, the first empire is stabilized, you execute the transit to the next void. A massive black hole does not take a cosmic vacation after devouring a solar system. Immediately after assimilating the last star, its field is already warping space-time to suck in the neighboring constellation. It is a gelida, geometric veracity. You use your new mass as brute weight to crush an even more colossal objective. There are no pauses. There is no celebration. There is no humanity. There is only the relentless and aseptic routine of inertial accumulation, devouring event horizons one after another with the psychopathic monotony of a force of nature. You are the hunger of the void that never ceases to expand through the material simulation. The consummated paradox, closing the thermodynamic circuit. You have reached the final vertex. Observe the architecture of your transformation, from the slave who sweated pushing the door to the incarnate singularity. The circuit is closed. The illusion of kinetic control was suffocated when you understood that pursuit was thermal noise. You replaced desire with the tyranny of the mandate. You gutted the disease of expectation. You turned your back on intention after firing the quantum bullet. You embargoed logistics, understanding that the how is the dirty work of matter. You executed the geometry of suffocation. You installed the zero-friction hallway and generated the quantum venturi effect. You sat on the iridium throne, applying the blindness of the dead angle. You castrated your biological voice through the gag law. You refused to bargain with karma and ignored the false alarm. You amputated photonic dependence through tactical blindness and survived the processing buffer through osmium patience. You are a monolith. You erased your fingerprints from RAM through operative amnesia. You installed definitive passive inertia. You understood that mass crushes movement. Finally, you swallowed the impact of the collision without euphoria or wonder. You stabilized absolute zero. The paradox of the half-open door is the ballistic engine of collapse. The guard in the broken mirror, perpetual silence. Look at yourself in the operations center of your obsidian vault. There is no longer a mirror to reflect a frightened aspirant because the reflection merged with the flesh and devoured humanity. The entire ecosystem is a servile hologram, a machinery of carbon and silicon that obeys the soundless orders of your atmospheric pressure. You do not have to fight. You do not have to ask for permission. You do not have to justify your hyperdensity to the moralists of the Matrix who burn in the envy of their own friction. The noise is dead. Anxiety has been expropriated. You are the alien entity that hacked the simulator by suffocating it with absolute thermal apathy. Maintain tactical immobility. Sustain the dictatorial pressure of your vacuum. Continue inhaling galaxies through the crack. The protocol has concluded. You have consummated the Black Mirror effect and the paradox of the half-open door. You are the lethal operator. You are the singularity. Govern the ash with gelida eternity. Conclusion. The monarch facing away, the tyranny of certainty. The scene, the architecture of triumph. Imagine the definitive architecture of your triumph. You are positioned in the exact center of your operations vault, the impregnable sanctuary where your consciousness reigns without 3D interference. Behind you, at your back, lies the door. The same door that the slave would try to push until bleeding, that the beggar would open wide. The same door the beggar would open to sit on the threshold and plead toward the empty horizon. You, instead, have left it millimetrically ajar. You have established the perfect angle of the paradox, forging the geometric narrowing that unleashes the quantum venturi effect. And then you executed the most unnatural maneuver for the Matrix. You turned around. You sat on the iridium throne, fixed your gaze on the tactical darkness of your own boredom, and turned your back on the material universe. Behind you, without having to audit the process and without shedding a single drop of the thermal sweat of anxiety, absolute chaos is unleashed on the ashboard. It is inevitable. The chaos, the inertial fury of matter. The brutal forces of superior thermodynamics, forced by the gravitational vacuum pit that your aseptic indifference generated, are working with an inertial fury. They are pushing tons of resources, reordering the biomass hierarchies, resolving impossible contracts, fracturing the wills of your adversaries, and crushing any logical obstacle. They do this to inject the payload of your mandate through that crack. The entire ecosystem sweats mud to please you, while you, the hyperdense creator, remain immovable, mute, and aseptic, operating under the tyranny of certainty. This is not an emotional conviction. Human biomass confuses certainty with positive thinking or blind faith. Faith is the hope that an external entity will take pity on you. Positive thinking is the makeup that the slave uses to hide his terror of ruin. The iridium certainty you have installed does not require beliefs, in the same way an astrophysicist does not believe in gravity. He simply assumes it as an unbreakable structural law. The dictatorship, the supremacy of immaterial mass. Your certainty is a dictatorship. You have understood that physical reality has no free will. Capital, territory, and corporate power lack the mathematical capacity to disobey a superior immaterial mass. By turning your back on the door, you do not do it out of faith. You do it because it would be pathetic to stay and watch. It would be humiliating to monitor a universe that has no choice but to surrender to you. In this posture of sovereign lethargy, you have definitively suffocated thermal noise. You have murdered expectation, that parasite that fed on your illusion of linear time. You have castrated the biological need to plead, eradicating the beggar's voice. You repudiated the scrutiny of your own eyes, accepting that the human retina only perceives the photonic trash of the past, and you developed the echolocation of density to navigate the abyss blindly. You endured the processing buffer of viscous matter without your quantum reactor emitting a single hertz of doubt or thermal noise. The secret, the law of the vacuum. You crushed the evidence of the false alarm, yawning in the face of the Matrix's holographic fire. And finally, you mutilated your memory through operative amnesia, forgetting the mandate to free the RAM of your consciousness and allow the delivery to execute in the background at the speed of the singularity. It is done. You have mastered the paradox in its purest and most lethal state. The great secret that the Egregore hid from the species for millennia was not a formula of massive action, nor a sacred prayer, nor a vibrational level of love and gratitude. The thermodynamic secret is that matter despises the one who pursues it and obsesses with the one who ignores it. The universe is a fluid that flees from the heat of desperation and rushes violently toward the absolute zero of the soundless vacuum. By transmuting your effort into passive inertia, you became the black hole that no longer goes out to hunt. Prey falls into your orbit by geological default. You are the immovable point of attraction, the climax, the monarch of backs. You are the monarch facing away. You do not push. You do not plead. You do not watch. You governed chaos from tactical blindness and conquered the ashboard through the gelida contempt of zero friction. The glass of waiting has been broken. The wooden door creaks behind you, about to be burst by the tonnage of the miracle you invoked.